Hi, it's Mr. Bennett, and in this video what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about what living things are made of. We spent all that time talking about chemistry so we could understand how living things are made. So when it comes to living things are made out of one of four main organic compounds. And quick vocab lesson right here, the word organic, this is referring to a molecule that has carbon in it. I'm not talking about organic food or any of that crap like that. Organic, in the terms of chemistry, means it's a molecule that has carbon in it somewhere, somehow. So all living things are made out of four main compounds or molecules that are organic. They have chemistry. What are these four main organic compounds? Well, first one is we have carbohydrates. These are sugars. Other one we have is lipids. Lipids are oils and fats. So some example, any cooking oil or like butter or fat or anything like that, that's a lipid. Third one we'll talk about is we'll talk about proteins, and proteins are things like meat and cheese, and eggs have a lot of protein in it and so forth that way. And then the last one we need to talk about is we need to talk about nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are DNA and RNA. So all living things are made out of these four things. Every part of your body, with the exception of your bones, is made out of these four things right here: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. So carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins are all examples of a macromolecule. Now, what's a macromolecule? Well, here's how I think about it. A macromolecule is a large molecule that's made of several smaller molecules put together. I know you all watched Power Rangers when you're growing up, and at the end of Power Rangers, they called on their Zords, and their 5 different robots came together to make this one big robot, Megazord, all right? That's what a macromolecule is like. That this robot here is made out of 5 different robots put together. And that's kind of what macromolecules are like. That a macromolecule is this huge molecule that's made out of several smaller molecules that are put together. Now, we have a name for the small molecules. We call these monomers. Monomers. So the small molecules we call monomers. And these are small molecules that we put together to make a macromolecule. And when we put a bunch of monomers together, we make what's called a polymer. So a macromolecule is a polymer. And a polymer is something that's made of several of the same piece put together over and over and over again. So a great example of a polymer would be like a chain, link of metal chain. A chain is made out of a bunch of individual links that are put together. That would be a polymer. So you can think of a macromolecule as being like a chain. We take a bunch of these monomers, which are the same molecules, we put them together in a line and we make a macromolecule. And a macromolecule is an example of a polymer. So as we go through and we talk about these 4 types of macromolecules, carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins, for each of these 4 macromolecules you need to know the monomer that makes them up. So carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins are all polymers, meaning they're all made of the exact same piece, just lots of them put together. So for each of the 4, you should know what the monomer is that makes up that macromolecule. All right, so let's start out and let's talk about carbohydrates first. Carbohydrates are sugars. When you talk about someone who says they need to get carbs out of their diet, they're trying to get sugar out of their diet so they can lose some weight. There are different types of carbohydrates, and the 2 main types of carbohydrates that we talk about is we talk about monosaccharides. Mono means one, so this is a simple sugar, one sugar. This is the smallest sugar you can make. And examples of monosaccharides are glucose, fructose, galactose, deoxyribose, and ribose. These are all examples of monosaccharides, single sugars. Okay? Now, you can take single sugars, monosaccharides, and you can put them together to make a macromolecule. And when you do that, you have what's called a polysaccharide. So a polysaccharide is made out of several of these monosaccharides that are joined together like a chain. And examples of this would be like cellulose, not cellulite, cellulose, starch. Starch is flour. Flour is starch, which is just made up of a bunch of these monosaccharides put together, chitin and glycogens. These are all examples of polysaccharides. So when we're talking about the macromolecule carbohydrate, it's made up of a bunch of simple sugars put together. So for a carbohydrate, the monomer would be a polysaccharide. So why do we need carbohydrates? What do they do for us? There are 2 main functions of carbohydrates, and the most important function of carbohydrates is energy. There's a reason why if you have a big game or if you're a cross-country runner or something like that, they often tell you to eat pasta. Pasta is made out of carbohydrates. And what do we use carbohydrates for? Energy that we use to live and to move and so forth. And so all living things use carbohydrates to make this thing called ATP. And ATP is what your body uses for energy. ATP is so important that if your body stopped making ATP right now, you'd be dead in 5 seconds. That you make lots and lots of ATP every day, and how you do that is by using carbohydrates. So the most important function of carbohydrates is for energy, and all living things use carbohydrates for energy. Now the other function of carbohydrate that's a very important one is it's used for structure, for holding things together. And plants are a great example of this. Plants use sugar, carbohydrate, to hold themselves together. Plants make something called cellulose. And if you want to touch cellulose, just touch paper sometime or touch wood. Wood is made out of cellulose. Now what's cellulose? It's a sugar. It's a macromolecule of carbohydrate. Now here what you're looking at is a bunch of single sugars put together. These are glucose. You put a bunch of glucoses together and you can make cellulose. And cellulose is what holds plants up. So a piece of wood is nothing more than a piece of cellulose, and cellulose is nothing more than a sugar. So plants use carbohydrates so they can stand up. Some animals also use carbohydrates for structure. And examples of this would be like your insects. They make a type of macromolecule called chitin. Now chitin is a macromolecule that's also made out of sugar. It's made out of a bunch of glucoses put together. And examples of things that use chitin would be like all your insects, your spiders, centipedes, lobsters and crayfish and so forth. These guys, the exoskeleton of all insects and spiders and so forth is actually made out of sugar. So when you step on a bug and it goes crunch, what you're crunching is actually a macromolecule made out of sugar. Another example of a living thing that uses sugar for structure is fungus. Fungus uses sugar for structure as well. The next macromolecule we need to talk about is we need to talk about lipids. Now lipids, the more common name for lipids are fats. So all fats are lipids, all oils are lipids, waxes, and even some steroids are examples of lipids. So what are lipids and what are they made out of? Well, the basic structure of a lipid is this molecule here called a triglyceride. Triglyceride. This is what your fat is made out of. What a triglyceride is we have this molecule here called glycerol, and we attach to it these other molecules that we call fatty acids. So you take a glycerol and you attach some fatty acids to it and you have a lipid. That's what you're looking at. And there are hundreds of different types of these fatty acids. And so that's how we can make all different types of oils and fats and so forth. So like olive oil and canola oil, it's made out of these triglycerides. The fat that's in you that makes you a little bit heavier, it's made out of triglycerides as well. So when we're talking about lipids, the monomer that we're going to be talking about are these fatty acids. That when you make a lipid, you take and you put a bunch of these fatty acids together to make what's called a triglyceride. And when you do that, you make the macromolecule of fat. So what is the function of lipids? Why do we have lipids? Well, you probably already know one if you just thought about it for a second. One of the most important functions of lipids is the storage of energy. That fat is what allows animals to make it through the winter. Here we got a polar bear. This is a big old fat polar bear getting ready to hibernate. You guys know the bears hibernate throughout the winter. They sleep their way through the winter. Well, this is what a bear looks like before hibernation. This is what a polar bear looks like after hibernation. He obviously lost a lot of weight. The reason why he lost a lot of weight is he went several months without eating. How can he go several months without eating? He lived off of his fat. So energy storage is one of the most important jobs of lipids in all living things. Now, that isn't the only job that lipids do for you. Another important job that lipids do for you is for structural. And one of the important things that we use lipids for is making our cell membranes. All living things are made out of cells, and every cell has a cell membrane. This picture you're looking at right here, this is an electron microscope picture taken of the cell membrane of a cell. Here's the inside of the cell, here's the outside of the cell, and this thing right here in the middle is the cell membrane. This is what keeps things from going, this is what controls what goes in and out of the cell. Well, what are cell membranes made out of? Primarily fat. Primarily fat. They're made out of these molecules called phospholipids, And the middle part of all your cell membranes is made out of lipids. So living things use lipids for energy storage and to make cell membranes. The next macromolecule we need to talk about are proteins. Now, proteins is a term that a lot of people use, but they don't necessarily understand what they are. What proteins are, pure and simple, is another name for protein is a polypeptide. And what you're looking at here is a portion of the protein insulin. Insulin, the stuff that diabetics take, is actually a protein. Now, what proteins are made of is a bunch of amino acids put together. Each one of these circles you see right here represents a different amino acid. So how we make proteins is by putting a bunch of amino acids together. Now, there are lots of different amino acids, lots of them. Your body commonly uses over 20 different amino acids, and here you can see them. These are some of the different amino acids that are used to make up your body: proline, isoleucine, histidine, arginine, so forth. Whenever your body makes a protein, how it does it is by putting a bunch of amino acids together. So an example of something that's made out of protein is your fingernails. Your fingernails are made out of the protein keratin. How does your body make keratin? It puts a bunch of amino acids together in the right order to make that protein. So the monomer of a protein is going to be the amino acid. Whenever you make a protein, you put a bunch of amino acids together. The smallest protein in your body is 2 amino acids long. The largest protein in your body is the protein titin. It's found in your muscles. It's 34,500 amino acids long. And you have proteins that are made everything in between. Your skin is made out of proteins. Your hair is made out of proteins, so on and so forth. Now, I didn't list the functions of proteins here because there's just too many of them. Your body uses proteins for lots of stuff. You can use it for energy, you use it for structure. Your body's made out of protein. You can use it to make enzymes, to make hormones, to make all sorts of different things. So proteins, very important things made out of a bunch of amino acids put together. The last of the macromolecules we need to talk about is we need to talk about the nucleic acids. The most famous nucleic acid out there is DNA. DNA is an example of nucleic acid. DNA is a macromolecule. The other one that's in your body is RNA. RNA is also a macromolecule found inside your body. Now, what DNA and RNA are made out of is they are made of these molecules called nucleotides, that when you make a piece of DNA, you take a bunch of nucleotides and you put them together. Your DNA, that makes all the DNA in one of your cells, has 6 billion nucleotides. So DNA is made out of nucleotides. So the monomer that makes up nucleic acid is going to be the nucleotide. Well, the question is, what is a nucleotide and what's it made out of? A nucleotide has 3 major parts to it. The first one is this thing that we call a phosphate group. And this phosphate group we find in lots of different places. We find it in ATP. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. So ATP has 3 of these phosphate groups. We also find it attached to lipids to make a phospholipid. So a phosphate group is something that's used a lot in your body. Now attached to this phosphate group is going to be a sugar, a pentose sugar that has 5 carbons in it. And then attached to that sugar is going to be a nitrogenous base. All right? So these are the main things that make up a nucleotide, and if you take a bunch of these nucleotides and you put them together, you make a strand of DNA or RNA. Now, the different nitrogenous bases are adenine, guanine, cytosine, thymine, and uracil. Now, we're going to talk about, when we get to proteins and DNA and so forth later in the class, the order that these A's, G's, C's, and T's come in your DNA is the difference between you having blue eyes and brown eyes, the difference between you being 5'2" and 6'2", the difference between you getting sunburns easily and you not getting sunburns easily, whatever. That all the characteristics that make you up are determined by what nucleic acids you have and in what order those nucleotides come in that make up those nucleic acids.